My name is Margaret Rose Thompson, and at 72 years old, I've learned that the deepest cuts come from the hands that once held yours while crossing busy streets. I'm telling you this story not for sympathy, though I suspect you'll feel it, but because I want you to understand that sometimes the people we sacrifice everything for become strangers wearing familiar faces. Sometimes love isn't enough, and sometimes the only response to betrayal is consequences so severe they echo through generations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I was born Margaret Rose Caldwell in Detroit, Michigan in 1953, the daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress who taught me that hard work and integrity were the only currencies that mattered. I married David Thompson when I was 22, fresh out of secretarial school with dreams of a simple life filled with children's laughter and Sunday dinners around a crowded table. David was a real estate appraiser then, methodical and honest, to a fault. The kind of man who measured twice and cut once in everything he did. We settled in Springfield, Ohio, a mid-sized city that was neither too big nor too small, where neighbors still knew each other's names and the local high school. Football games drew half the town on Friday nights. David's work was steady, and together we saved every penny we could, living in a modest, two-bedroom ranch house on Elm Street while we planned for the family we both desperately wanted. Jessica arrived in 1979 after 3 miscarriages that had nearly broken my heart. She was perfect, 8 pounds and 2 ounces of pure miracle with David's dark hair and my stubborn chin. I remember holding her in the hospital room, promising her silently that I would give her everything I never had, that she would never want for anything if it was within my power to provide it. For the first few years, I stayed home with Jessica, while David built his reputation in the real estate community. Those were golden days, filled with playground visits and library story times, teaching Jessica to ride her bicycle in our driveway and reading her bedtime stories until my voice was hoarse. She was a bright child, curious about everything, always, asking questions that sometimes stumped me. Why is the sky blue, Mama? Where do dreams come from? Why can't we keep all the stray cats? When Jessica started kindergarten, I took a part-time job at Henderson's department store downtown, working in the ladies' clothing section 3 days a week. The extra income helped, but more than that, I enjoyed the interaction with customers, helping women find clothes that made them feel confident and beautiful. Mrs. Henderson, the owner's wife, took a liking to me and began teaching me about retail operations, inventory management, and customer service that went beyond just making a sale. David's career flourished throughout the 1980s as Springfield experienced a modest boom. He moved from appraising to commercial real estate, eventually starting his own small firm with 2 partners. I watched him work 16-hour days, poring over property surveys and zoning regulations at our kitchen table long after Jessica had gone to bed. His dedication inspired me to return to school part-time, taking business courses at the local community college while continuing to work at Henderson's. Jessica grew into a beautiful teenager, tall like her father with an infectious laugh that could light up any room. She was popular at school, made good grades, and seemed to have inherited the best qualities from both David and me. She played volleyball, participated in student government, and talked constantly about her plans for college. David and I encouraged her dreams, no matter how ambitious they seemed. It was in 1995, when Jessica was 16, that everything began to change, in ways I couldn't have anticipated. David came home one evening with news that would alter the trajectory of our entire family. His firm had been approached by a development group looking to purchase and renovate several older buildings in downtown Springfield, including the historic Meridian building where Henderson's department store had operated for 40 years. Mrs. Henderson was retiring, and the building's owner wanted to sell. The development group planned to convert the entire block into a modern shopping complex called Springfield Commons, anchored by a major department store chain and featuring dozens of smaller retail spaces. David's firm would handle the acquisition and development management, a project worth several $1,000,000. The irony wasn't lost on me that the store where I'd spent nearly 15 years working would become part of something bigger, something I might have a chance to be involved in creating rather than just serving. When David mentioned that the development group was looking for someone with retail experience to help with tenant recruitment and management, I surprised myself by expressing interest. Jessica was initially excited about the project, especially when she learned that the new mall would include stores and restaurants that appealed to teenagers. She spent hours sketching designs for her ideal shopping center, complete with a movie, theater, and food court that served more than just pizza and burgers. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and David and I began to see the project not just as a business opportunity, but as something that could benefit our entire community. The development process took 3 years, during which I gradually transitioned from my part-time position at Henderson's to working full-time with the development group. David taught me to read property surveys and understand zoning laws, while my retail experience proved invaluable in attracting quality tenants. I discovered I had a knack for negotiating lease agreements and understanding what retailers needed to succeed. Jessica graduated high school in 1997 and chose to attend Ohio State University, majoring in business with dreams of someday working in fashion merchandising. David and I were proud beyond words, especially since she'd earned a partial academic scholarship. We covered the remaining costs without hesitation, dipping into our savings because we believed education was the best investment we could make in her future. Springfield Commons opened in the fall of 1998 to great fanfare. The grand opening celebration drew thousands of people from throughout the region, and local newspapers hailed it as a sign of Springfield's economic vitality. David's firm handled the property management contract, while I was hired as the mall's assistant general manager, responsible for tenant relations and marketing coordination. Working at the mall felt like watching a small city come to life. Each morning, I arrived before most of the stores opened, walking through the corridors as maintenance crews finished their overnight cleaning and early employees unlocked their gates. There was something magical about those quiet moments before the crowds arrived, when the mall existed in perfect potential, ready to welcome thousands of people seeking everything from necessities to small luxuries. The success of Springfield Commons exceeded everyone's expectations. Within 6 months, occupancy reached 95%, and foot traffic numbers surpassed projections by 30%. David's firm was commissioned to develop 2 additional shopping centers in nearby cities, and my role expanded to include overseeing retail operations at all 3 locations. Jessica thrived at Ohio State, making Dean's List multiple times and landing a coveted internship with a major retail chain in Columbus during her junior year. She came home for holidays and summer breaks with stories about her classes, her sorority sisters, and her growing understanding of the retail industry. David and I listened with pride as she talked about marketing strategies and consumer psychology, recognizing our own influence in her developing expertise. It was during her senior year that Jessica first mentioned Marcus Steinberg, a fellow business student whose family owned several successful restaurants in Columbus. She spoke about him casually at first, mentioning study groups and class projects they worked on together. By spring semester, however, it was clear that Marcus had become more than just a classmate. Jessica brought Marcus home for Easter dinner in 1999, and David and I were immediately impressed by his intelligence and ambition. He was polite, well-dressed, and clearly smitten with our daughter. Over ham and mashed potatoes, he talked knowledgeably about retail trends and asked thoughtful questions about the mall business. When he offered to help clear the table and insisted on washing dishes despite my protests, I found myself hoping this relationship would develop into something serious. After graduation, Jessica and Marcus both found entry-level positions with retail companies in Columbus, and their relationship continued to flourish. They visited Springfield regularly, often spending weekends helping with projects around our house or joining us for dinner at the country club David and I had recently joined as our financial situation improved. The mall business had been exceptionally good to us. By 2000, David's firm managed 5 shopping centers across Ohio, and my role had evolved into regional operations director with responsibility for tenant recruitment and retention across all properties. Our modest ranch house on Elm Street had been replaced by a beautiful colonial in Springfield's most desirable neighborhood, complete with a swimming pool and 3-car garage. More importantly, we'd begun investing in retail real estate beyond David's development projects. Using our industry knowledge and connections, we quietly acquired ownership stakes in several smaller shopping centers throughout the Midwest. Most people, including Jessica, assumed our improved lifestyle came entirely from David's successful development firm, unaware that we'd built a substantial real estate portfolio that generated significant passive income. Jessica and Marcus married in June 2001 in a ceremony that was everything she'd dreamed of since childhood. The reception was held at Springfield Country Club, overlooking the golf course where David had learned to play after our financial situation improved. 200 guests celebrated as our daughter danced with her new husband under twinkling lights strung between oak trees that had witnessed decades of similar celebrations. David walked Jessica down the aisle that day with tears in his eyes, and I watched from the front pew thinking that we'd done everything right as parents. Our daughter was educated, married to a good man, and ready to build her own successful life. The future seemed filled with promise, grandchildren, and the satisfaction that comes from raising a child who would contribute positively to the world. Marcus's family welcomed Jessica warmly, and the young couple settled into a comfortable apartment in Columbus while building their respective careers. Jessica worked for a major department store chain, learning merchandising and buyer responsibilities, while Marcus joined his family's restaurant business with plans to eventually expand into retail food service. For the next several years, life followed a predictable and pleasant rhythm. Jessica and Marcus visited Springfield monthly, usually staying for Sunday dinner and catching us up on their careers and social lives. David and I traveled occasionally, taking cruises to the Caribbean and driving trips through New England. But we always looked forward to coming home to our familiar routines and responsibilities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The mall business continued to thrive, though we began noticing subtle changes in consumer behavior that would eventually reshape the entire industry. Online shopping was becoming more popular, particularly among younger consumers, and traditional department stores were starting to struggle with declining foot traffic. David and I adapted by recruiting more experiential tenants, restaurants, entertainment venues, and service providers that couldn't be easily replaced by internet shopping. Jessica gave birth to our first grandchild, Emma, in 2004, followed by Michael 2 years later. David and I were devoted grandparents, babysitting regularly when Jessica and Marcus wanted time together, and spoiling the children with toys and clothes and weekend adventures. Watching Jessica with her own children reminded me of those early years when she'd been the center of our universe, curious and loving and full of potential. It was around this time that cracks began to appear in what I'd believed was our perfect family relationship. Jessica started making comments about our lifestyle that seemed tinged with resentment rather than pride. During one visit, she remarked that our house was awfully big for 2 people, and wondered aloud whether we really needed such an expensive car. When I mentioned a vacation David and I were planning to Europe, she responded with a tight smile and a comment about how nice it must be to have that kind of freedom. Initially, I attributed her attitude to the stress of raising 2 young children while maintaining a demanding career. Jessica had returned to work 6 weeks after Emma's birth and seemed constantly exhausted, juggling responsibilities that would challenge anyone. Marcus traveled frequently for the restaurant business, leaving Jessica to handle most parenting duties alone during the week. David and I offered to help more with the grandchildren, but Jessica declined. insisting that she and Marcus could manage on their own. When we suggested they consider moving closer to Springfield where we could provide more support, Jessica firmly rejected the idea, explaining that their careers required them to stay in Columbus. The comments about our lifestyle became more frequent and pointed over the following months. During Christmas dinner in 2006, Jessica mentioned that she and Marcus were struggling with their mortgage payments and daycare costs, then pointedly observed that we'd recently remodeled our already beautiful kitchen. When David offered to help with their expenses, Jessica declined with obvious irritation, saying they didn't want charity from anyone. I began to sense that Jessica resented our financial success, though I couldn't understand why. David and I had worked hard for everything we'd achieved, and we'd always been generous with our daughter, paying for her education, her wedding, and numerous other expenses without ever making her feel obligated or guilty. We'd taught her the value of hard work and integrity, and we'd assumed she would be proud of our accomplishments rather than resentful of them. The tension came to a head during Easter 2007, when Jessica arrived at our house clearly upset about something. Over dinner, she announced that Marcus's restaurant business was struggling due to increased competition and rising food costs. They were considering bankruptcy, and Jessica was terrified they would lose their house and be unable to provide for Emma and Michael. David immediately offered to loan them whatever they needed to get back on their feet, but Jessica's response shocked us both. She accused us of flaunting our wealth while her family struggled, claiming that we cared more about our expensive lifestyle than our own grandchildren's welfare. When David pointed out that we'd offered help multiple times only to be rejected, Jessica screamed that we should have insisted, that real parents would have forced their support on struggling children rather than accepting polite refusals. The argument that followed was unlike anything that had ever occurred in our family. Jessica accused us of being selfish and out of touch, claiming that we'd forgotten what it was like to struggle financially. She said we lived in a bubble of privilege while real people faced real problems, and that our success had made us cold and uncaring. David and I were stunned by the venom in her voice and the unfairness of her accusations. We'd never forgotten our humble beginnings, and we'd worked hard to help others in our community through charitable contributions and volunteer work. The idea that our success had somehow made us bad people was incomprehensible to us. The conversation ended with Jessica storming out of our house, taking Emma and Michael with her. She refused to speak to us for 3 months, ignoring our phone calls and returning our letters unopened. David and I were heartbroken, unable to understand how offering financial help had somehow made us the villains in our daughter's story. When Jessica finally contacted us again, it was only because she needed something. Marcus's business had indeed filed for bankruptcy, and they were facing foreclosure on their house. This time, Jessica didn't refuse our help, but she accepted it with obvious resentment, as if we were somehow responsible for their financial problems rather than trying to solve them. David wrote a check for $50,000 to bring their mortgage current and cover their most pressing debts. We also agreed to pay for Emma and Michael's private school tuition, which had become unaffordable for Jessica and Marcus. In return, we asked only that Jessica acknowledge that we'd always been willing to help, and that our success didn't make us bad people. Jessica's apology was half-hearted at best. She claimed to appreciate our help while simultaneously suggesting that we could afford to be more generous given our obvious wealth. When I asked what she meant by that comment, she gestured around our house and said that people with swimming pools and 3-car garages shouldn't hesitate to help family members facing homelessness. The conversation revealed something disturbing about how Jessica viewed our relationship. In her mind, our financial success created an obligation to support her lifestyle choices, regardless of whether those choices were wise or whether she showed any gratitude for our assistance. She seemed to believe that because we had more than we needed, we owed her whatever she required to maintain her desired standard of living. Over the following year, Jessica's requests for financial help became increasingly frequent and presumptuous. She needed money for Emma's dance classes, for Michael's baseball equipment, for vacation trips that she claimed were necessary for the children's development. Each request was presented as if we had no choice but to comply, often accompanied by guilt-inducing comments about our grandchildren's needs or comparisons to other families who supposedly received more support from their parents. David and I found ourselves walking on eggshells around our own daughter, afraid that any perceived slight would result in another angry confrontation or another period of enforced separation from our grandchildren. We paid for expenses we thought were unnecessary and tolerated behavior we found disrespectful because we loved Emma and Michael and couldn't bear the thought of losing access to them. The situation deteriorated further when Jessica learned about our real estate investments. During a casual conversation about retirement planning, David mentioned that we owned stakes in several shopping centers beyond those managed by his development firm. Jessica's reaction was immediate and explosive, demanding to know why we'd never mentioned these investments before, and calculating aloud how much passive income they must generate. When David explained that we'd built our real estate portfolio, gradually over 20 years, reinvesting profits and carefully selecting properties, Jessica accused us of hiding our wealth while allowing her to struggle unnecessarily. She seemed incapable of understanding that our investments required expertise, risk, and years of patient capital growth, viewing them instead as unearned income that should rightfully be shared with her. The conversation escalated when Jessica demanded specific details about our net worth and annual income, claiming she had a right to know since she was our only heir. When David refused to discuss our private financial information, Jessica threatened to cut off our access to Emma and Michael unless we became more transparent about our assets. It was a turning point that revealed the extent to which our relationship with Jessica had become transactional rather than loving. She no longer visited because she enjoyed our company or wanted her children to know their grandparents, but because she viewed us as a source of financial support that she could manipulate through emotional blackmail. David and I began to recognize that our generosity had created a monster. By consistently rescuing Jessica from the consequences of poor financial decisions, we'd enabled her to avoid developing responsibility and self-reliance. Our daughter had learned to view us as a bank rather than parents, and our grandchildren had become pawns in an increasingly manipulative game. The breaking point came in March 2008, when Jessica called with another crisis that required immediate financial intervention. Marcus had invested their savings in a restaurant venture that failed within 6 months, leaving them with significant debt and no emergency fund. Jessica needed $25,000 immediately to avoid defaulting on various loans, and she expected us to provide it without question. When David suggested that perhaps it was time for Jessica and Marcus to consider more conservative financial strategies and possibly seek professional counseling about their spending habits, Jessica exploded. She screamed that we were heartless and selfish, that we cared more about money than our own family, and that she was tired of begging for help that we could easily afford to give. The conversation that followed was brutal in its honesty. David told Jessica that our willingness to help had always been motivated by love, but that her attitude had made our generosity feel like an obligation rather than a gift. I added that we were concerned about the example being set for Emma and Michael, who were learning to view their grandparents as sources of money rather than sources of love and wisdom. Jessica's response revealed the depth of her entitlement and resentment. She claimed that our wealth morally obligated us to support our family members, regardless of how that support was received or appreciated. She accused us of being typical rich people who forgot where they came from and looked down on others who struggled financially. When David pointed out that we'd given her nearly $100,000 over the previous year alone, Jessica dismissed it as pocket change compared to what we could afford. She demanded to know why we deserved to live in luxury while her children lacked opportunities that money could provide. The conversation ended with Jessica hanging up on us, but not before delivering a threat that chilled us both. She said that, if we continued to be stingy with our money, we would find ourselves cut off from Emma and Michael permanently. She claimed that our grandchildren didn't need toxic influences in their lives, and that she was perfectly capable of raising them without our interference. David and I spent sleepless nights discussing what had happened to our family and wondering where we'd gone wrong as parents. We'd raised Jessica to value hard work and integrity, but somewhere along the way, she'd developed a sense of entitlement that poisoned every interaction we had with her. Our success, which should have been a source of pride for our daughter, had instead become a source of resentment and manipulation. We consulted with a family therapist who explained that our situation wasn't uncommon among successful families. Children who grow up with financial security sometimes develop unrealistic expectations about money and support, particularly if parents consistently rescue them from financial difficulties. The therapist suggested that we establish clear boundaries and stick to them, regardless of Jessica's threats or manipulations. Taking the therapist's advice, David and I decided to have one final conversation with Jessica about our relationship and her expectations. We invited her to dinner at our house, arranging for Marcus to watch Emma and Michael so we could speak privately without involving the grandchildren in adult conflicts. Jessica arrived already defensive, clearly expecting another lecture about her financial management. Instead, David and I calmly explained that we loved her unconditionally, but could no longer enable her irresponsible behavior. We offered to continue helping with legitimate emergencies and the grandchildren's educational expenses, but we would no longer provide money for lifestyle choices or poor investment decisions. Jessica's reaction was predictably explosive. She accused us of abandoning our family when they needed us most, claiming that our conditions were designed to humiliate her rather than help her. When David explained that we were trying to encourage responsibility rather than dependence, Jessica screamed that we were using money to control her life. The conversation deteriorated rapidly from there. Jessica accused us of being ashamed of her and Marcus, claiming that we looked down on them for not achieving the same level of financial success. She said we were typical wealthy people who forgot their obligations to family members who struggled, and that our attitude was destroying her children's relationship with their grandparents. When I tried to explain that our concerns were about her attitude rather than her circumstances, Jessica cut me off with a stream of accusations that revealed years of suppressed resentment. She claimed that we'd always favored our business interests over our family relationships, that we cared more about our reputation in the community than our daughter's happiness, and that our wealth had made us selfish and cold. The evening ended with Jessica storming out of our house, shouting that she was done begging for help from people who clearly didn't care about their own family. She promised that we would regret our selfishness and that Emma and Michael would grow up knowing exactly what kind of grandparents they had. True to her word, Jessica cut off all contact with us following that confrontation. Our phone calls went unanswered, our letters were returned unopened, and our attempts to visit were met with threats to call the police if we didn't leave her property immediately. David and I were devastated, but we also felt a strange sense of relief that the constant drama and manipulation had finally ended. For 6 months, we heard nothing from Jessica or Marcus. We learned about Emma and Michael's activities through mutual friends and social media posts that Jessica forgot to make private, watching from a distance as our grandchildren grew and changed without us. The silence was painful, but it also allowed David and me to rediscover the peace and contentment that had been gradually eroded by years of conflict. It was during this period of estrangement that David's health began to decline. He'd always been robust and energetic, but he started experiencing fatigue and shortness of breath that initially seemed like normal signs of aging. When the symptoms persisted and worsened, our family doctor referred him to a cardiologist who discovered significant blockages in his coronary arteries. The diagnosis required immediate surgery and a lengthy recovery period that would limit David's ability to work for several months. Despite our estrangement, I felt obligated to inform Jessica about her father's condition, hoping that a medical crisis might bring our family back together and help her gain perspective on what truly mattered. Jessica's response to news of David's heart surgery was disappointingly predictable. Rather than expressing concern for her father's health or offering to help during his recovery, her first question was about how his illness might affect our financial situation and her future inheritance. She seemed more worried about the potential impact on our real estate investments than about whether David would survive the surgery. When I tried to explain the seriousness of David's condition and the uncertainty surrounding his recovery, Jessica's response revealed the extent to which our relationship had become purely transactional in her mind. She offered to visit the hospital only if we agreed to discuss financial arrangements that would ensure her family's security regardless of what happened to David. The conversation was so cold and calculating that I hung up feeling more angry than hurt. Our daughter had reduced her father's life-threatening illness to a potential threat to her financial expectations, showing no genuine concern for his well-being or our family's emotional needs during a terrifying time. David's surgery was successful, but his recovery was slower and more difficult than the doctors had initially predicted. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital, followed by 2 months of cardiac rehabilitation and gradual return to normal activities. Throughout this challenging period, Jessica made no effort to visit or even call to check on his progress. Despite living only 90 miles away, the absence of our daughter during David's medical crisis forced both of us to confront the reality of what our family had become. The child we'd raised with love and sacrifice had grown into a woman whose primary interest in us was financial, and who viewed her parents' health problems primarily in terms of how they might affect her inheritance. David's illness also prompted us to reevaluate our estate planning and consider whether Jessica had demonstrated the maturity and responsibility necessary to manage significant wealth. Our attorney suggested that we consider establishing trusts or other mechanisms that would provide for our grandchildren's education and welfare while limiting Jessica's direct access to our assets. As David's health improved and he gradually returned to work, we began making discreet inquiries about Jessica's current situation. What we learned was troubling, but not entirely surprising. Marcus had started another restaurant venture that was already struggling, and Jessica had taken a part-time job at a local department store to help cover their mounting expenses. More concerning were reports from mutual friends that Jessica had been complaining bitterly about our abandonment of our family during David's illness. According to these secondhand accounts, Jessica was telling people that we'd cut her off financially out of spite and were using David's heart problems to manipulate her into accepting our unreasonable demands. The distorted version of events that Jessica was spreading throughout our social circle revealed her complete inability to accept responsibility for the deterioration of our relationship. In her narrative, she was the victim of wealthy, controlling parents who withdrew their support because she'd refused to be manipulated by money. David and I realized that any attempt to reconcile with Jessica would require her to acknowledge her role in destroying our family relationship, something she seemed psychologically incapable of doing. We also understood that our grandchildren were being raised with a completely false understanding of their grandparents' character and motivations. The situation reached a crisis point in December 2008, when Jessica finally contacted us after 8 months of silence. However, her call wasn't motivated by concern for David's health or desire to repair our relationship, but by another financial emergency that required immediate intervention. Marcus's latest restaurant venture had failed spectacularly, leaving them with enormous debts and facing potential bankruptcy. Jessica needed $50,000 immediately to avoid losing their house, and she expected us to provide it despite months of refusing to speak to us or allow us to see our grandchildren. When David asked why she thought we would help after her behavior during his illness, Jessica's response was both shocking and revealing. She claimed that our money gave us an obligation to help family members regardless of personal conflicts, and that withholding financial support was a form of emotional abuse that damaged her children's welfare. Jessica seemed genuinely unable to understand why her behavior during David's heart surgery had been hurtful or inappropriate. In her mind, family medical crises were separate issues from financial arrangements, and our expectation that she show Basic human concern for her father's well-being was unreasonable and manipulative. The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd ever had with our daughter about money, family, and responsibility. David explained that our willingness to help had always been based on love and respect, not obligation, and that Jessica's attitude had destroyed both. I added that we could no longer enable her financial irresponsibility at the expense of our own emotional well-being. Jessica's reaction was swift and brutal. She threatened to ensure that we never saw Emma and Michael again, claiming that our selfishness made us unfit grandparents who would be toxic influences on innocent children. She promised to tell the grandchildren exactly what kind of people their grandparents really were, and to make sure they understood why they'd been cut off from our lives. When David suggested that Jessica seek professional help for her obvious, emotional problems, she exploded with rage that seemed completely disproportionate to the situation. She screamed that we were trying to make her seem crazy because she refused to accept our financial manipulation and that our wealth had corrupted us beyond redemption. The call ended with Jessica delivering an ultimatum that would define our relationship going forward. She demanded that we immediately provide the $50,000 she needed, along with a written commitment to give her $200,000 annually for the next 10 years to ensure her family's financial security. In return, she would allow us supervised visits with Emma and Michael, though only if we agreed never to discuss money or family conflicts in their presence. David and I were stunned by the audacity of Jessica's demands and the complete absence of any acknowledgement that her behavior had been inappropriate or hurtful. Our daughter had essentially attempted to extort us using our love for our grandchildren as leverage, while showing no remorse for the pain she'd caused during David's illness. We declined Jessica's ultimatum, explaining that we couldn't maintain a relationship based on financial coercion and emotional manipulation. David told her that we loved her unconditionally, but couldn't continue enabling her destructive behavior, and that our door would always be open if she decided to seek help and take responsibility for her actions. Jessica's response was to carry out her threats immediately and completely. She moved with Marcus and the children to Phoenix, Arizona, claiming that Marcus had found a business opportunity there, but clearly intending to put geographical distance between us and our grandchildren. Before leaving Ohio, she made sure that Emma and Michael understood they were moving because their grandparents cared more about money than family. The last conversation I had with my granddaughter was heartbreaking in its innocence and confusion. 8-year-old Emma called to say goodbye, asking through tears why Grandma and Grandpa didn't love them anymore, and why they wouldn't help Mommy when she needed money for important things. I tried to explain that we loved them very much, and that the problems were between adults, but Jessica took the phone away before I could say much. David and I were left alone with our grief and our growing understanding that our daughter had become someone we no longer recognized. The loving, curious child we'd raised had been replaced by a manipulative adult whose sense of entitlement had poisoned every aspect of our relationship. Our attempts to teach responsibility and gratitude had somehow produced the opposite result, creating a person who viewed our success as her birthright and our love as a tool for financial manipulation. In the months that followed Jessica's move to Arizona, David and I tried to rebuild our lives and find peace with the choices we'd made. We increased our charitable giving, focusing particularly on organizations that helped families in crisis, and we threw ourselves into our work and community activities. The mall business continued to thrive, and our real estate investments provided the security that allowed us to be generous with causes we believed in. We also began the process of revising our estate planning to reflect the reality of our family situation. Working with attorneys who specialized in complex family dynamics, we established trusts that would provide for Emma and Michael's education and welfare, while ensuring that Jessica couldn't squander their inheritance on poor financial decisions or lifestyle choices. The new estate plan included provisions that would give the grandchildren access to their inheritance only after they reached 30 years of age and demonstrated financial responsibility through education and career achievements. We also established a charitable foundation that would receive the majority of our assets, ensuring that our life's work would continue to benefit our community long after we were gone. These legal arrangements gave us some peace of mind, but they couldn't fill the emotional void left by Jessica's absence or ease our concern for grandchildren we were no longer allowed to see. We hired a private investigator to provide periodic updates on Emma and Michael's welfare, learning that they were healthy and doing well in school despite their mother's continued financial struggles. Reports from the investigator revealed that Jessica and Marcus's move to Arizona had not solved their underlying problems. Marcus's latest business venture had failed within a year, and Jessica was working full-time at a retail store while constantly complaining to neighbors and coworkers about the wealthy parents who had abandoned their family out of greed and selfishness. The investigator also discovered that Jessica had been telling people in Phoenix elaborate lies about our family background, claiming that David and I had inherited our wealth rather than earning it through hard work and wise investments. According to her version of events, we were entitled rich people who looked down on working families and used our money to control and manipulate our own children. These reports confirmed what David and I had suspected. Jessica was psychologically incapable of accepting responsibility for her role in destroying our family relationship. In her mind, she would always be the victim of unreasonable parents who chose money over love, regardless of how much evidence existed to the contrary. David's health remained stable following his heart surgery, but the stress of our family situation had aged both of us in ways that went beyond physical appearance. We found ourselves grieving not just for the relationship we'd lost with Jessica, but for the grandchildren who were growing up with a completely false understanding of their family history. It was during this period of sadness and reflection that an unexpected opportunity arose that would eventually provide us with both purpose and a means of justice that we couldn't have imagined. The shopping center industry was undergoing significant changes as online retail continued to grow, and many mall properties were struggling with declining occupancy and revenue. David's development firm was approached by a national investment group looking to acquire distressed retail properties throughout the Midwest, with plans to renovate and reposition them for changing consumer preferences. The scope of the potential transaction was enormous, involving dozens of properties worth hundreds of millions of dollars. As David and I discussed the opportunity, we realized that our decades of experience in retail real estate had positioned us perfectly to participate in this industry transformation. We had the knowledge, connections, and financial resources to play a significant role in shaping the future of retail properties in our region. More importantly, we began to see how our involvement in this massive redevelopment project could serve purposes beyond financial gain. By creating new retail and entertainment concepts that serve changing community needs, we could build a legacy that would benefit thousands of families while ensuring that our life's work continued to have positive impact long after we were gone. The decision to commit significant resources to the retail redevelopment project represented a new chapter in our lives, one focused on creating value for others rather than simply accumulating wealth for ourselves. We knew that Jessica would eventually learn about our involvement in such a large transaction, and we wondered how she would react to news that her parents were investing millions in projects that could transform entire communities. As we prepared to embark on this new venture, David and I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. We'd started with nothing but dreams and determination, built a successful business and a substantial real estate portfolio, and raised a daughter who we'd hoped would carry on our values and continue our legacy. The failure of our relationship with Jessica was painful, but it had also clarified our priorities and motivated us to ensure that our resources would be used for positive purposes, regardless of what happened within our family. We couldn't control our daughter's choices or attitudes, but we could control how our success would ultimately impact the world around us. 3 years passed without a single word from Jessica. 3 years during which David and I threw ourselves into our work and tried to build meaning from the wreckage of our family relationships. The retail redevelopment project had consumed most of our time and energy, involving complex negotiations with dozens of property owners, municipal governments, and potential tenants across 4 states. What had started as a business opportunity had evolved into something resembling a mission, a chance to revitalize struggling communities while creating sustainable value for future generations. Our days began before sunrise and often extended well past midnight as we traveled between properties, reviewed architectural plans, and negotiated lease agreements with national retailers who were reimagining their physical presence in an increasingly digital world. The work was exhausting but fulfilling in ways that our previous successes had never been, perhaps because we understood that this project would define our legacy regardless of whether our own family appreciated our efforts. Springfield Commons, our original mall development, had become the flagship property in our expanding portfolio. We'd successfully recruited several innovative retailers who specialized in experiential shopping, creating destinations that couldn't be replicated online. A cooking school occupied the former department store anchor space, offering classes to amateur chefs while selling high-end kitchen equipment and gourmet ingredients. The old arcade had been converted into a state-of-the-art fitness center that attracted members from throughout the region. The success of our reimagined retail concepts caught the attention of industry publications and business schools, bringing us recognition that we'd never sought but found gratifying nonetheless. David was invited to speak at real estate conferences about adaptive reuse of retail properties, while I contributed articles to trade magazines about tenant mix strategies for changing consumer preferences. More personally satisfying were the letters we received from community members whose lives had been touched by our development projects. Small business owners thanked us for creating affordable retail spaces that allowed them to pursue entrepreneurial dreams. Parents wrote about children who'd discovered passions for cooking or fitness in our educational programs. Local officials credited our investments with spurring additional economic development that brought jobs and tax revenue to struggling areas. These tangible expressions of gratitude helped fill some of the emotional void left by Jessica's absence, reminding us that success could be measured in ways beyond financial returns or family satisfaction. We were making a difference in people's lives, creating opportunities and solving problems that extended far beyond our own immediate concerns. The private investigators' reports continued to arrive quarterly, providing updates on Emma and Michael's progress that were both reassuring and heartbreaking. Emma had developed into an exceptional student with particular talents in mathematics and science, while Michael showed promise as an artist and athlete. Both children appeared healthy and well-adjusted despite their families' ongoing financial struggles. Jessica and Marcus had moved 3 times within Phoenix, always to smaller apartments as their economic situation deteriorated. Marcus's pattern of failed business ventures continued unabated, each new restaurant or catering concept lasting only months before closing due to poor planning, insufficient capital, or simply bad luck. Jessica worked multiple part-time retail jobs to supplement their household income, often putting in 60-hour weeks while caring for the children and managing their increasingly chaotic domestic situation. What struck me most about these reports was how Jessica's life had become exactly what she'd once accused us of looking down upon. She was trapped in a cycle of financial instability and exhausting work, struggling to provide basic necessities for her children while watching their opportunities diminish with each failed venture and forced relocation. The very circumstances she'd blamed us for not preventing had become her permanent reality, despite years of our attempts to help her build a more stable foundation. According to the investigator, Jessica continued to tell anyone who would listen that her parents had abandoned their family for selfish reasons, but her complaints had evolved to include resentment about our professional success. She'd somehow learned about our retail redevelopment projects and was telling people that we were becoming wealthy, while our own grandchildren lacked basic necessities, as if our business achievements somehow increased our moral obligations to support her. Poor decisions. The investigator also reported that Emma and Michael occasionally asked about their grandparents, particularly around holidays and birthdays when other children received gifts from extended family. Jessica's responses to these questions were apparently harsh and bitter, describing David and me as cold people who cared more about money than family relationships. She'd convinced the children that we'd chosen wealth over love, a narrative that probably helped her feel better about her own choices, but condemned our grandchildren to grow up believing they'd been rejected by grandparents who actually loved them desperately. These reports always left me feeling helpless and angry, knowing that our grandchildren were being raised with completely false information about their family history, while we were powerless to provide our perspective or demonstrate our continued love. Jessica had weaponized the children's natural desire for grandparent relationships, using their confusion and disappointment as further evidence of our supposed cruelty. David's response to these updates was typically more philosophical than mine. He would remind me that we'd done everything possible to maintain healthy relationships with Jessica and the children, and that their current circumstances resulted from Jessica's choices rather than our failures. While his logic was sound, it did little to ease the grief I felt watching our grandchildren grow up as strangers who'd been taught to view us as villains in their family story. Our work provided some distraction from these painful realities, particularly as our retail redevelopment projects began attracting national attention from investors and industry analysts. We'd successfully transformed 12 underperforming shopping centers into thriving mixed-use developments that combined retail, dining, entertainment, education, and community services in ways that served evolving consumer preferences while strengthening local economies. The financial returns from these projects exceeded our most optimistic projections, generating passive income that supplemented our existing real estate portfolio and David's development firm revenues. More importantly, we'd proven that retail properties could be successfully repositioned for long-term viability, rather than simply demolished and replaced with different types of development. Our success attracted partnership opportunities from institutional investors who wanted to replicate our model in other markets. Private equity firms and pension funds approached us with proposals to provide capital for massive expansion of our redevelopment strategy, offering terms that would have made us enormously wealthy while allowing us to maintain operational control of the projects. David and I spent months evaluating these partnership proposals, ultimately deciding to proceed with a limited expansion that would allow us to transform retail properties in 20 additional cities over the next 5 years. The scope of the commitment was staggering, involving hundreds of millions of dollars in capital investments and thousands of jobs in construction, property management, and retail operations. More personally meaningful was our decision to establish the Thompson Family Foundation as the vehicle for our charitable giving and community development initiatives. The foundation would ultimately receive the majority of our assets, ensuring that our life's work would continue benefiting communities long after we were gone, while providing structured support for causes we cared about. The foundation's initial focus areas included educational programs for low-income students, small business development initiatives, and affordable housing projects in communities where we operated retail properties. We also established scholarship funds at several universities to support students pursuing careers in real estate, retail management, and urban planning, hoping to inspire others to view business success as a platform for community service. Creating the foundation required extensive legal work to ensure that our philanthropic goals would be achieved efficiently and effectively. Our attorneys helped us structure the organization to minimize tax obligations while maximizing community impact, establishing governance procedures that would prevent the foundation from becoming another wealthy family's vanity project, rather than a serious force for positive change. The foundation's first major initiative was a partnership with Springfield School District to create career education programs that would teach high school students practical skills in retail operations, property management, and small business development. Students would spend part of their day in traditional academic classes and part of their day working in our retail properties, earning wages while gaining real-world experience that would prepare them for immediate employment or further education. The program's success exceeded everyone's expectations, with participating students showing improved academic performance, higher graduation rates, and better post-secondary outcomes than their peers. Local employers began recruiting graduates directly from the program, and several students started their own businesses using skills and connections they'd developed through their work experience. Community response to the Foundation's initiatives was overwhelmingly positive, with local newspapers and television stations featuring stories about our programs and their impact on participating families. The recognition was gratifying, but more important was the evidence that our resources were being used to create genuine opportunities rather than simply providing temporary assistance. It was during this period of professional success and personal fulfillment that I began experiencing health problems that would eventually change everything about our situation. The symptoms started gradually, occasional dizziness and fatigue that I attributed to the stress and travel demands of our expanded business operations. When the problems persisted and worsened, David insisted that I see our family physician for a comprehensive evaluation. Our daughter had moved far beyond reasonable disagreement or even justified resentment into territory that suggested serious psychological problems that we were powerless to address. David and I spent several days processing the implications of Jessica's response and discussing our options with attorneys who specialized in family law and estate planning. The consensus was that we needed to focus on protecting our assets and ensuring that our philanthropic goals could be achieved regardless of what Jessica did to interfere with our legacy. We also consulted with a private security firm about protecting ourselves from any escalation of Jessica's threats. While we didn't believe she would actually attempt physical violence, her emotional instability and financial desperation created risks that we couldn't ignore, particularly given my health concerns and our public profile in the business community. The security assessment revealed that Jessica had been monitoring our activities through social media and business publications, collecting information about our real estate projects and foundation initiatives. She'd apparently become obsessed with tracking our financial success while simultaneously resenting it, creating a psychological dynamic that could potentially motivate increasingly dangerous behavior. The security consultant recommended several precautions, including changes to our daily routines, enhanced protection for our residents and offices, and careful monitoring of any attempts by Jessica or her associates to contact us directly or through third parties. While these measures felt excessive, we recognized that wealthy individuals often became targets for manipulation or violence from family members who felt entitled to their resources. More proactively, we decided to accelerate our estate planning and foundation development to ensure that our assets would be protected and our philanthropic goals achieved regardless of any future complications from Jessica's behavior. This process involved creating multiple layers of legal protection and establishing governance structures that would prevent any single individual from derailing our carefully planned legacy. The accelerated timeline meant working with teams of attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors to complete complex transactions that would normally take years to implement. We transferred ownership of our retail properties to the foundation through structures that provided maximum tax benefits while ensuring professional management that would continue our community development mission. We also established separate educational trusts for Emma and Michael that would be managed by independent trustees with instructions to provide college funding and career development support, regardless of their mother's cooperation or interference. The trusts included provisions for the children to receive detailed information about their family history when they reached 18, ensuring that they would eventually understand their grandparents' true feelings and motivations. Perhaps most importantly, we created a comprehensive family archive that would preserve our story for future generations, including correspondence, photographs, business records, and video interviews that documented our life together and our relationship with Jessica. The archive would be maintained by the foundation and made available to family members who expressed genuine interest in understanding their heritage. These legal and financial arrangements provided some peace of mind, but they couldn't address The emotional pain of knowing that our grandchildren were being raised with false information about their family history. Emma and Michael would grow up believing they'd been rejected by grandparents who actually loved them deeply, a tragedy that no amount of money or legal documentation could fully remedy. David's response to this reality was characteristically pragmatic, focusing on what we could control rather than what we couldn't. He threw himself into foundation work with renewed energy, often saying that helping other families succeed was the best way to honor our love for grandchildren we couldn't help directly. My own response was more complex, combining grief for lost relationships with determination to ensure that our story would eventually be told truthfully. I began writing detailed letters to Emma and Michael that would be delivered on their 18th birthdays, explaining our family history from our perspective and expressing the love that circumstances had prevented us from demonstrating directly. These letters became a form of therapy, allowing me to process years of accumulated grief while creating something meaningful that might eventually bridge the gap between our family's past and future. I wrote about my pregnancy with Jessica, her childhood achievements, and our pride in her early accomplishments, trying to help the grandchildren understand that their mother had once been a beloved daughter, despite our current estrangement. I also wrote about our business journey, explaining how hard work and wise decisions had created the wealth that Jessica resented, while emphasizing that our success had always been viewed as a platform for helping others, rather than simply accumulating possessions. The letters included specific examples of our charitable work and community involvement, demonstrating that wealth had increased rather than decreased our sense of responsibility to others. Most importantly, the letters expressed our unconditional love for Emma and Michael, while acknowledging the complex circumstances that had separated us from their lives. I wanted them to understand that their grandparents had never stopped caring about them, even when adult conflicts made direct communication impossible. Writing these letters consumed months of emotional energy, but they provided a sense of purpose that helped me cope with my health problems and the ongoing stress of our family situation. Each letter was reviewed by David and our attorney to ensure that the contents were factually accurate and legally appropriate, creating documents that would someday provide our grandchildren with information they deserve to have. The letter writing project also inspired us to create video messages that would supplement the written materials, allowing Emma and Michael to see and hear their grandparents expressing love and explaining family history that their mother had distorted or concealed. These videos were professionally produced and stored in multiple formats to ensure their preservation and accessibility. As my health continued to decline gradually, David and I made the difficult decision to step back from active management of our business operations and focus primarily on foundation work that could be conducted from our home office. The change allowed us to reduce travel and stress while maintaining involvement in projects that provided meaning and satisfaction. The retail redevelopment program continued to expand under professional management, with new properties being acquired and transformed according to the model we developed. Our investment partners expressed complete confidence in the program's continued success, providing additional capital that would allow expansion into markets we'd never considered entering personally. The Foundation's educational and community development programs also continued to grow, benefiting thousands of families across the Midwest while establishing our legacy as people who had used business success to create opportunities for others. The recognition and gratitude we received from program participants provided emotional sustenance that helped offset the pain of our family estrangement. It was during this period of professional transition and personal reflection that we received unexpected news that would fundamentally change our situation and provide opportunities we'd never imagined. The private investigator called with information that Jessica and Marcus were facing their most serious financial crisis yet, with circumstances that might finally force our daughter to confront the reality of her choices and their consequences. Marcus's latest business venture had failed catastrophically, leaving the family with enormous debts and facing eviction from their apartment. Jessica had been fired from her retail job for confrontational behavior with customers and supervisors, eliminating their primary source of income at the worst possible time. The initial examination revealed elevated blood pressure and some irregular heart rhythms that concerned Dr. Matthews enough to refer me to a cardiologist for additional testing. The cardiac evaluation uncovered a previously undiagnosed congenital condition that had been gradually worsening over time, potentially explaining the symptoms I'd been experiencing for several months. The cardiologist explained that my condition was manageable with medication and lifestyle modifications, but that it would require ongoing monitoring and could potentially become life-threatening if not properly controlled. The diagnosis wasn't immediately catastrophic, but it forced David and me to confront our mortality and consider how my health problems might affect our ability to continue our demanding work schedule. More emotionally challenging was the realization that my grandchildren would probably never know about my illness or have the opportunity to spend time with me while I was still healthy enough to enjoy their company. Jessica's decision to cut off all contact meant that Emma and Michael would learn about my condition only after I was gone, if they learned about it at all. The thought of dying as a stranger to my own grandchildren was almost unbearable, but it also crystallized my determination to ensure that they would eventually understand the truth about their family history. David and I began working with our attorneys to create detailed documentation of our relationship with Jessica, including copies of all correspondence, financial records showing our support for her family, and testimonials from friends and business associates who had witnessed our attempts to maintain loving relationships despite her behavior. We also commissioned a professional biographer to interview us extensively about our life story, creating a comprehensive record that would preserve our perspectives and experiences for future generations. The biography would include not only our business achievements and philanthropic activities, but also our family relationships and the painful choices we'd been forced to make when love alone wasn't enough to overcome destructive behavior. My health remained stable for several months following the initial diagnosis, allowing David and me to continue our work while making gradual adjustments to reduce stress and travel demands. We hired additional staff to handle day-to-day operations at our retail properties, freeing us to focus on strategic planning and foundation activities that were less physically demanding. The biographer's interviews proved to be surprisingly therapeutic, providing an opportunity to reflect on our journey and articulate lessons we'd learned about business, family, and the responsibilities that come with success. We talked about the early years of struggle and sacrifice, the gradual building of our real estate portfolio, and the satisfaction of creating opportunities for others through our development projects. More difficult were the conversations about Jessica and the deterioration of our family relationships. Recounting the progression from loving daughter to manipulative stranger was painful, but necessary to ensure that future generations would understand the context for decisions that might otherwise seem harsh or unforgiving. We wanted Emma and Michael to eventually understand that our love for them had never diminished, even when circumstances forced us to make choices that temporarily separated us from their lives. The biography project also prompted us to reach out to other family members and friends who could provide additional perspectives on our story. David's sister confirmed our recollections about Jessica's behavior during family gatherings, while longtime friends recalled conversations in which we'd expressed concern about our daughter's sense of entitlement and poor financial decisions. Perhaps most importantly, we interviewed several families who had benefited from our foundation's programs, documenting how our business success had been transformed into opportunities for others. Their stories provided powerful evidence that our wealth had been used responsibly and generously, contradicting Jessica's claims that we were selfish people who cared only about accumulating money. As my health remained stable and our business operations continued to thrive, David and I began discussing the possibility of making one final attempt to reconcile with Jessica. The approach would need to be different from our previous efforts, acknowledging the reality of what our relationship had become while still offering hope for future healing. We decided to write a letter that would be delivered through our attorney, ensuring that Jessica couldn't simply ignore or destroy it without at least seeing its contents. The letter would summarize our perspective on our family history, acknowledge our mutual mistakes and disappointments, and offer specific terms for rebuilding our relationship based on realistic expectations rather than idealistic hopes. The letter took weeks to compose, with multiple drafts that tried to balance honesty with compassion, firmness with love. We wanted to be clear about our boundaries and expectations while still leaving room for Jessica to save face and move forward, without admitting complete responsibility for our family's problems. The final version explained that we understood our relationship had been damaged by misunderstandings and different perspectives about money, family, and responsibility. We acknowledged that our success had created complications and perhaps unrealistic expectations, while also expressing our belief that family relationships should be based on love and respect rather than financial obligations. We offered to meet with Jessica, Marcus, and the children in a neutral location with a family counselor present to facilitate honest communication and establish ground rules for future interactions. We also proposed creating educational trust, funds for Emma and Michael that would ensure their college expenses were covered while protecting them from being used as leverage in adult conflicts. Most importantly, we made it clear that our love for Jessica and the grandchildren had never diminished, despite our disappointment with how our relationships had deteriorated. We wanted them to know that our door would always be open for sincere efforts at reconciliation, but that we could no longer enable destructive behavior or accept manipulation disguised as family loyalty. The attorney delivered the letter on a Tuesday afternoon in March, exactly 4 years after Jessica had moved to Arizona. We asked him to wait for Jessica's initial response and provide a brief summary of her reaction, hoping that some indication of her attitude would help us understand whether reconciliation was possible or whether we needed to accept permanent estrangement. Jessica's response came within hours of receiving the letter, delivered as a voicemail to our attorney's office that was so profanity-laden and threatening that he advised us to consider filing a restraining order. The message made it clear that Jessica viewed our letter not as an olive branch, but as another attempt to manipulate and control her family through false expressions of love and concern. According to Jessica's rant, we were trying to buy our way back into the grandchildren's lives because we'd realized that dying alone would be the natural consequence of our selfish choices. She accused us of using my health problems to generate sympathy and manipulate emotions, claiming that our offer of educational trusts was just another way to control her children's futures. Most disturbing was Jessica's threat to ensure that Emma and Michael would never have any contact with us even after we died. She promised to move again if necessary to prevent any communication, and threatened to change the children's names legally so that they couldn't be found by our estate attorneys or foundation representatives. The venom and irrationality of Jessica's response eliminated any remaining hope that our family relationships could be repaired through communication or compromise. Most critically, they were behind on payments for Emma's medical treatment for a serious condition that required ongoing specialized care. The investigators' report included details that suggested Jessica was finally beginning to understand the connection between her family's perpetual financial instability and her own poor decisions. According to his sources, she'd been overheard telling a neighbor that she wished she'd listened to her parents' advice about money management, though she quickly followed this admission with renewed complaints about our supposed selfishness. More significantly, Emma had apparently begun asking pointed questions about her grandparents that Jessica was finding increasingly difficult to answer. The 13-year-old had somehow learned that other children received help from extended family members during financial crises, and she wanted to know why her grandparents were different from other people's relatives. The investigators' sources suggested that Emma had been conducting her own research using school computers, trying to learn more about her grandparents and the family history that her mother had never fully explained. The teenager had apparently discovered news articles about our business success and foundation activities, creating cognitive dissonance with her mother's portrayal of us as selfish people who abandoned their family. This information prompted David and me to consider whether Emma's emerging independence and critical thinking skills might provide an opportunity to establish communication despite Jessica's continued hostility. At 13, our granddaughter was old enough to understand complex family dynamics, while still young enough to potentially develop genuine relationships with grandparents she'd been taught to distrust. We consulted with our attorney about the legal and practical implications of attempting to contact Emma directly, understanding that any such effort would need to be handled carefully to avoid escalating conflicts with Jessica or inadvertently causing problems for our granddaughter. The attorney suggested that indirect communication through the Foundation's educational programs might provide a way to demonstrate our continued love and support without violating Jessica's explicit demands for no contact. The Foundation had recently expanded its scholarship program to include students from Arizona schools, creating a potential mechanism for Emma to benefit from our resources without requiring Jessica's cooperation or acknowledgement. If Emma applied for and received a Foundation scholarship, she would inevitably learn about her grandparents' role in creating the program while gaining access to educational opportunities that her family's financial situation had made impossible. This strategy appealed to us because it would allow us to help our granddaughter without enabling Jessica's continued irresponsibility, while also providing Emma with information about her family history that might encourage her to seek direct communication when she became an adult. The scholarship program's merit-based selection process would ensure that Emma earned any benefits through her own achievements, rather than simply receiving them because of family connections. We worked with the Foundation's staff to ensure that information about scholarship opportunities reached Arizona schools where Emma was enrolled, while maintaining the program's integrity and avoiding any appearance of favoritism or manipulation. The scholarship criteria emphasized academic achievement, community service, and demonstrated financial need, requirements that Emma would clearly meet based on the investigators' reports about her excellent grades and her family's economic situation. The waiting period to see whether Emma would learn about and apply for the scholarship was emotionally challenging, requiring us to balance hope with realistic expectations about the obstacles that might prevent our plan from succeeding. Jessica might discover the connection and prevent Emma from applying, or our granddaughter might choose not to pursue the opportunity even if she learned about it. More fundamentally, we had to accept that Emma might have been so thoroughly indoctrinated, with negative feelings about us, that no amount of financial assistance or family history would overcome her mother's influence. 13 years of hearing that her grandparents were selfish people who abandoned their family might have created psychological barriers that would persist even when confronted with contradictory evidence. Despite these concerns, the possibility of reconnecting with our granddaughter provided hope that had been absent from our lives for years. Even if the scholarship strategy didn't lead to immediate communication, it would demonstrate our continued love and support while providing Emma with resources that might help her achieve her potential regardless of her family's chaotic circumstances. The Foundation's educational programs had always been designed to identify and support promising students who lacked resources rather than opportunities, making Emma an ideal candidate even without considering her family connections. Her academic achievements, artistic talents, and apparent resilience in difficult circumstances represented exactly the kind of potential that our scholarship program was intended to nurture. As we waited to learn whether Emma would discover and pursue the scholarship opportunity, David and I continued working on other aspects of our legacy planning while managing my gradually declining health. The certainty that our time together was limited added urgency to our efforts to ensure that our story would be preserved accurately and that our resources would continue benefiting others long after we were gone. The comprehensive family archive was nearing completion, with hundreds of hours of video interviews, thousands of photographs, and detailed documentation of our business and charitable activities organized in formats that would be accessible to future researchers and family members. The archive would eventually be housed at a major university, with instructions for making materials available to Emma and Michael when they expressed interest in learning about their heritage. We also completed our detailed estate planning, with provisions that would protect our assets from Jessica's potential interference, while ensuring that our philanthropic goals would be achieved regardless of future family conflicts. The legal Structures we'd created were complex but necessary, providing multiple layers of protection against challenges that our daughter might mount after we were gone. Perhaps most importantly, we finalized the letters and videos intended for Emma and Michael's 18th birthdays, creating time capsules that would provide our perspective on family history while expressing the love that circumstances had prevented us from demonstrating directly. These materials would be delivered by independent trustees with instructions to ensure that the grandchildren received them regardless of their mother's wishes or interference. As spring turned to summer and my health continued its gradual decline, David and I found unexpected peace in the knowledge that we'd done everything possible to preserve our legacy and protect our grandchildren's futures. Whether Emma would discover the scholarship opportunity or whether our efforts would succeed in bridging the gap with our family remained uncertain, but we'd created multiple pathways for truth and love to eventually overcome the barriers that Jessica's choices had erected. The retail business continued to thrive under professional management, generating income that funded expanding foundation programs, while demonstrating that our success had been built on solid principles rather than luck or exploitation. The recognition and gratitude we received from communities where our projects had created jobs and opportunities provided daily evidence that our wealth had been used responsibly and generously. Most importantly, we'd learned that family relationships couldn't be forced or manipulated, but that love could be expressed through actions even when direct communication was impossible. Our foundation's work with educational programs and community development had become a way of honoring our grandchildren, while helping other families avoid the problems that had destroyed our own relationships. The lessons we'd learned about wealth, family, and responsibility would survive in the archive and the foundation's ongoing work, ensuring that future generations could benefit from our experiences, even if our own children chose to reject our wisdom. Emma and Michael would eventually have access to resources and information that might help them understand their heritage and build better lives, regardless of the obstacles their mother's choices had created. As we prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead, David and I took comfort in knowing that our love for Jessica and the grandchildren had never wavered, even when circumstances forced us to make difficult choices about enabling destructive behavior. Our story would eventually be told completely and truthfully, allowing others to judge whether we'd chosen wisely when forced to choose between unconditional support and necessary boundaries. The Foundation's work would continue long after we were gone, creating opportunities for thousands of families while serving as a living memorial to the values that had guided our business and personal decisions. Whether Jessica would ever acknowledge the love that motivated our choices remained uncertain, but the evidence of that love would be preserved in the lives we'd touched and the opportunities we'd created for others. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 18 months after we'd implemented the scholarship program. Emma had not only discovered the opportunity, but had submitted an application that brought tears to my eyes. Her essay about overcoming financial hardship to maintain academic excellence while caring for her younger brother revealed a maturity and resilience that reminded me of myself at her age. More importantly, Emma had done her research. Her application included a carefully worded paragraph acknowledging that she'd learned about her grandparents' role in establishing the foundation and expressing gratitude for educational opportunities that her family circumstances had made impossible otherwise. Between the lines, I could read a teenager's desperate attempt to reconnect with family she'd been taught to reject. The scholarship committee, unaware of Emma's family connection, unanimously selected her as a recipient based purely on merit. The award would cover her remaining high school expenses and provide full college tuition along with mentorship opportunities that could transform her future. When the foundation's staff called to notify her, Emma broke down crying on the phone, saying it was the first good news her family had received in years. David and I celebrated quietly that evening, knowing that our granddaughter would finally have resources and opportunities that Jessica's poor decisions had denied her. More significantly, Emma's acceptance letter included contact information for foundation staff who could provide guidance about college preparation and career planning, creating legitimate channels for ongoing communication. Jessica's reaction was swift and predictable. Within hours of Emma receiving the scholarship notification, our attorney received a furious voicemail accusing us of manipulating our granddaughter and attempting to buy her loyalty. Jessica threatened legal action to prevent Emma from accepting the scholarship, claiming that we were using educational funding to circumvent her parental authority and poison her daughter against her. But Jessica had underestimated her daughter's intelligence and determination. Emma had apparently anticipated her mother's objections and prepared arguments that revealed her growing understanding of their family's financial reality. According to our foundation staff, who maintained regular contact with scholarship recipients, Emma had convinced her mother that rejecting educational funding would be devastating to their family's already precarious situation. The monthly check-ins with foundation mentors provided Emma with guidance about college applications, while giving us indirect updates about our granddaughter's progress and well-being. These conversations revealed a remarkable young woman who was thriving academically despite chaotic home circumstances, maintaining honor roll status while working part-time to help support her family. More touching were the subtle messages Emma embedded in her communications with foundation staff, expressing gratitude for opportunities while carefully avoiding direct references to family relationships that might anger her mother. Her thank you notes mentioned hoping to make her grandparents proud someday, phrases that our staff recognized as intended for our eyes. Michael also began showing interest in his sister's scholarship and the grandparents he'd been taught to distrust. Now, 11 years old, he started asking Emma questions about the foundation and expressing curiosity about family members he'd never been allowed to know. Emma apparently shared some of what she'd learned through her research, creating cracks in Jessica's carefully constructed narrative about our supposed selfishness. The gradual shift in our grandchildren's understanding coincided with Jessica and Marcus's most catastrophic business failure yet. Marcus had invested their savings and borrowed heavily to open a restaurant that closed within 3 months, leaving the family facing bankruptcy and potential homelessness. Jessica's desperate calls to various family members seeking financial assistance had been unsuccessful, as her pattern of manipulation and ingratitude had finally exhausted everyone's patience. It was during this crisis that Emma made a decision that would change everything. Using contact information she'd obtained through the foundation, our granddaughter called our attorney's office and asked to speak with us directly. The conversation that followed was awkward and emotional, with Emma struggling to balance years of indoctrination against her growing understanding of the truth about our family. Emma told us that she'd been researching our business achievements and charitable work, trying to reconcile her mother's stories with evidence of our community involvement and generosity. She'd read news articles about our foundation's programs and seen photographs of us at charity events, creating cognitive dissonance with Jessica's portrayal of us as heartless people who abandoned their family. Most importantly, Emma expressed genuine love and curiosity about the grandparents she'd been denied the opportunity to know. She wanted to understand our perspective on the family conflicts, while acknowledging that she couldn't openly defy her mother's wishes without creating additional problems for her younger brother. David and I agreed to maintain discretion about our contact with Emma while providing emotional support and guidance that she desperately needed. We established secure communication channels that allowed regular conversations without Jessica's knowledge, giving Emma access to family history and perspective that helped her understand her heritage. These secret conversations revealed the extent to which Jessica had distorted our family story, presenting her own poor decisions as our failures, while concealing the financial support we'd provided over the years. Emma was shocked to learn about the hundreds of thousands of dollars we'd given Jessica, money that could have provided stability and opportunities for the grandchildren if it had been managed responsibly. More significantly, Emma expressed understanding about why we'd eventually been forced to establish boundaries with her mother. Her own experiences with Jessica's manipulative behavior and financial irresponsibility had taught her lessons about enabling destructive patterns, making her receptive to our explanations about tough love and necessary consequences. The relationship with Emma developed carefully over several months. with our granddaughter gradually gaining confidence about expressing her own feelings and opinions, rather than simply parroting her mother's resentments. She began calling us regularly, sharing details about school, friends, and aspirations while seeking advice about college plans and career goals. Michael remained more cautious, but Emma's influence gradually encouraged him to participate in occasional phone calls, where he could ask questions about family history and receive reassurance about our love for both grandchildren. These conversations revealed an artistic and sensitive boy who'd been deeply affected by his family's instability, but remained hopeful about his future. The secret relationship with our grandchildren continued for almost a year before Jessica discovered the communications and exploded with rage that surpassed even her previous outbursts. She accused Emma of betraying her family and threatened to withdraw her from school and move again to prevent further contact with us. But Emma had grown stronger and more independent during our months of communication, and she refused to be intimidated by her mother's threats. At 16, our granddaughter understood her legal rights and the potential consequences of Jessica's increasingly irrational behavior. She threatened to contact Child Protective Services if her mother interfered with her education or scholarship. Opportunities. The confrontation between Jessica and Emma marked the beginning of the end of our daughter's control over the family narrative. Michael, emboldened by his sister's courage, also began expressing his own opinions about grandparents he wanted to know, despite his mother's objections. Jessica's final, desperate attempt to reassert control involved demanding that we choose between our grandchildren and our financial resources. She called demanding $2 million in exchange for allowing open contact with Emma and Michael, claiming that this payment would compensate for years of their supposed suffering due to our abandonment. David's response was calm but final. He explained that we'd already provided more support than any reasonable grandparents could be expected to give, and that our relationship with the grandchildren would be based on love rather than financial extortion. He offered to continue Emma's scholarship and establish college funds for both children, but made it clear that we would no longer enable Jessica's destructive behavior. Jessica's reaction was to attempt one final manipulation, threatening to tell the grandchildren terrible lies about us that would destroy any possibility of future relationships. But Emma and Michael had heard enough truth to recognize manipulation when they encountered it, and Jessica's threats only strengthened their determination to maintain contact with grandparents who genuinely cared about their welfare. The end came suddenly when Jessica and Marcus decided to move to California, claiming that fresh opportunities awaited them there, but obviously hoping to create geographical distance that would complicate our relationship with the grandchildren. However, Emma was now 17 and legally able to make her own decisions about where to live and whom to maintain relationships with. Our granddaughter chose to remain in Arizona to finish high school and begin college with foundation support, moving in with a friend's family rather than following her parents to another inevitable failure. Michael, though younger, also expressed his intention to maintain contact with us regardless of where his parents moved. Jessica's final words to us were delivered through yet another attorney's letter, formally renouncing any claim to our estate, while simultaneously demanding that we never contact her again. The document was filled with accusations and resentment, but it also represented a form of liberation for everyone involved. David and I were finally free to build genuine relationships with our grandchildren without Jessica's interference, while Emma and Michael gained access to family support and resources that could help them build successful lives despite their parents' failures. Most importantly, the truth about our family had finally emerged, allowing love to overcome years of manipulation and lies. Emma graduated valedictorian of her high school class and began studying business at Arizona State University with full foundation support. Michael discovered his artistic talents through programs we funded, developing skills that provided both creative outlet and potential career opportunities. Jessica and Marcus disappeared into California's anonymity, leaving behind debts and disappointed creditors, but finally releasing their children from the cycle of financial crisis and emotional manipulation that had defined their family life. We heard occasionally about new business ventures and continued failures, but these reports no longer caused us pain or concern. Our grandchildren visit us regularly now, spending holidays and summers in Springfield while building their own successful lives. Emma talks about someday joining the foundation's work, while Michael has expressed interest in using his artistic talents to support our community development programs. The shopping mall where this story began still operates successfully, under our management, serving as both a business asset and a reminder of how far our family has traveled. The stores and restaurants provide opportunities for local families while generating resources that support our charitable work. David's health remains stable, and my own condition has improved with reduced stress and the joy of reconnecting with our grandchildren. We spend our time now supporting causes we believe in while watching Emma and Michael develop into remarkable young adults who understand the difference between love and manipulation. Sometimes forgiveness isn't possible, and sometimes justice requires patience rather than revenge. Jessica made her choices and must live with their consequences, while Emma and Michael have chosen truth over comfortable lies. The shopping mall that witnessed one abandonment has become the foundation for reconnections that honor love while refusing to enable destruction. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.